Howdy, everybody. This is Mike Taggy here, hobby soloist game dev, doing this part time after work. And I have a project, a roguelike solo dungeon crawl. And I wanted to implement some 2D shaders that highlight when something is active, be it a card, a piece of gear, or an enemy. Now, I did a search on YouTube. I didn't find any tutorials that showed me what I needed to know. I saw tutorials on how shaders worked in general and how to implement them. And then I did a search on the web and I found bits and pieces here and there, but I didn't find anything that showed me everything I needed to get it to work. So I want to put together a quick tutorial and give back to the community a little bit and teach other people what I had to piece together by searching in multiple places and doing some experiments myself. So here, let me show you what I want the end result to look like. So here, we're going to start off, and I want the enemies to be highlighted when they're actively going. So let me start an enemy turn. And I've got my enemies turned on to fast mode now, but I could slow that down. So as you can see that they change colors. Now, what I want to do is I want to show the player which card is selected. And when a card selects a piece of equipment, I want them to also see which equipment is highlighted for attacking. So here, I want to play the agility card. And then so you can see right now, I've got a shader running over it, showing that this is the highlighted card. So the next step in attacking one of the enemies nearby with the sword is to select the gear. So it's a ruby card, so I can do an attack with the sword. So I'm going to select the sword. Now you can see that both the piece of equipment and the card are highlighted. So when I'm going targeting, they'll have that information. So now I want to hit the Goblin Runner with it. Boom, knock him out. And that's the effect that I wanted to get. So I want to show you how to turn that on for a 2D game using a shader. All right. So I don't need to have that running anymore. Let me turn that off. So the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out what shader I want to get and apply. So a great place to look and find a shader is you can go to a website called GDScript. Is it GD shaders or Godot shaders? Yes, GodotShaders.com. So here I'm going to go into GodotShaders.com, and it has a bunch of shaders that you can add to your project and find one that you want to use. So here I'm going to pick the base of the one that I used. Click All Shaders. We'll come into here. I know that the one I want to use is on the third page. But there's a lot of great shaders that you can use here. Some of them are 2D, some of them are 3D. But the one I kind of want to use is I want to use these 2D highlights. So I come into here, and you're going to see down here that it's going to have this shader code. And I am certainly not an expert on shader code, but someone has helpfully provided this shader that I can use for free, right? It's under the Creative Commons license. So I've got this in my pocket as the shader that I want to use. So in here, I can click copy. All right, so I've got the code that I want to use for my shader. I can come back to my Godot project. So there's a couple of items that I want to apply the shader to, right? So I want to apply it to the enemies when it's their turn. I want to apply it to the cards themselves in the background when the card is selected. And those gear panels that you see, when those are selected, right? Here we can see the gear panels there. I want to apply it to those as well. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create this GD shader here in my game. So let's assume that I don't have any GD shaders at all. The first step that I would use is let's pretend I'm doing this with my card backgrounds. So I've got my card background node selected, and let me clear that out. So down here on the inspector tab, you're going to see an area that says material, and it should be empty. So here, I'm going to click on the empty box and go new shader material. Down here, it's going to have the shader, and I'll go ahead and say new shader. And just because we're going to have an example one, I'll put it here under the cards section. I'll create a temporary one that I'll discard later to not muck up things. So I'll go ahead and create it, and it assigns it. So here we're going to see we have the temporary GD shader. I can click on it, double click on it, and then it's added to this shader editor area. So in here, we see the blank one that's a canvas item. Well, I've got this shader that someone has very helpfully provided for me that I can just paste in here because I've clicked that copy button and copied it to my clipboard. A quick Control V. And here, I've actually got the shader in there. Control S, I'm going to save it. Let's make this a little bit smaller. And here you can see that I've got it and it's shading the material. Now, for the final version that I used, it's the one that's outline.gdshader as well. I actually combined two shaders to actually have the luminosity of the base card increase as well. You can tweak the shaders if you want, but for the purposes of this tutorial, that's enough to understand what's going on here. All right, so I've got this GD shader created. I can also create a new one. So I also created a new one that's just blank, and it just has a single line here, shader underscore type, space, canvas item, and it's got that semicolon. So this one's kind of my blank one. So what I want to do here is, because I don't want things with this highlight effect when I'm not highlighting that card, the enemy's turn isn't, or the gear isn't activated. So I actually want to change this shader back to that blank one I created. So let me do quick load, and I'm just going to put this blank one in there and leave it in there for when it's non-active, because my goal is I want to highlight it at certain points using the code of the game. So back here, now I've got this set. It's got a shader set up, but it's the blank one. And I'll show you real quick here, right? The enemy texture, it's got the same thing going on. I've gone ahead and set this. It's the texture rect, not the enemy. Same thing, shader material, and I put the blank one. Again, same thing from my gear panel, shader material, and it's the blank one. So I've slotted the blank shader material into all three of these pieces. And I have my temp GD shader or outline GD shader already set up in here. So what do I do to actually have these changed by the GDScript in the code? Let me go and click the code section here. And what I did to do this is, for each of these three items, I created an export variable and made it a shader material. So you can see right here, right? Maybe let me get a little closer here. At export var, and I named it highlight gear and no highlight, and I made it a shader material. So let me make that more of a normal vision size for myself. In here, you're going to see that I can set those as an export variable. And then so when I did that, let me take those out. For the no highlight in the inspector panel, I want it to be the blank one, right? So there's my blank one. And for when it's highlighted, I want it to say outline.gdshader. So I've now slotted each of those into the inspector so that I can change it to those by code. So let me jump to the area of code where it's doing that. Find. I created a new function, right? Function is apply highlight. It doesn't return a variable, so I'm returning void. And since in this case, I want the gear panel itself to be highlighted, I can just type in the material property, right? If you remember, that's this shader material. I've made the highlight gear my export variable. So I literally just say material equals highlight gear, right? The material of the panel is this export shader material variable I have at the top. I created a second function, remove highlight. Again, the same thing. I'm just doing it in reverse. The material is the no highlight. Okay? So now the next step is I just have to call that. Let me show in the code where I did that, copy it, find in files, right? And I actually apply the highlight when the card selects it. So from the card itself, right? If the card is played and it's played for an instant effect, I'm not going to highlight anything. Otherwise, it targets the area 2D, right? Because that's what we target. We target the collision shape of the area 2D. So when the target is selected, I grab the gear panel parent and I call the apply highlight function. When I want to remove the highlight, let me do a find in files from there. And I actually remove the highlight by doing a signal, because if I'm removing it, sometimes I'm removing it by right-clicking and canceling out of the card action. Sometimes I'm triggering it when the gear actually activates. So I actually want the remove highlight to happen to check on every piece of gear, because a cancel and some of these second order effects aren't always triggering exactly. So I'm doing this by connecting a signal, right? So I went to my event bus, I created a signal, I called it gear remove highlight, and whenever that signal is called, then it's going to activate that remove highlight effect. Now, there's one thing in here that I want to show you, and it's different between this gear panel because the type of node it is. And in this case, the card art, I don't have scripts running for each of the pieces of my card art. So this export variable, in this case, is attached to a node 2D. And one of the things you're going to notice is that the way it's storing these export variables between the two of them is actually a little bit different, right? So here it's showing a shader material and then it's having it. And in this case, because I'm doing it to a node 2D, it's actually just storing it as the GD shader instead of the shader material. And the export variable code is the exact same in both of these cases, but it actually turns out a little bit different. So in this case, when I do the card highlight from the 2D node, I'm not calling it directly on this 2D node where the script is attached. I'm calling it on this texture rect, this card background texture rect that exists underneath it. So here you can see I'm calling the card background, which is just the node reference to this one. And in this case, I'm saying shader material.new. And then I'm setting the property of the shader to be the outline. So this is a little bit different as there's two ways to do it. All right. And so this script is being called from a node 2D, and the other one was being called directly from the item I want to highlight, and it's a panel container. So the code was a little bit different depending on which one I tried to use. The enemy, since it's being called on this is an area 2D, it looks the same as the gear panel. The way it's stored, it's the shader material. So I'm using the same syntax as I did for the panel container. And then, I just had to find out in the code where I needed to apply it, right? At the start of the enemy turn, I want enemy picture, I want their texture rect material to be that outline, which is that export variable. And then later on, I'm going to remove it right before I end the turn, whether they're finished attacking or they're moving twice. So that's how I implemented this shader to show the active objects, the active enemy, the active card, the active gear. And I hope this helps you and you can pick up from it. Now, if you've stuck around for this long and maybe you've looked at that game and you were wondering, hey, what's that game he's developing? You stuck around this far. I do have my demo out on my game. I'd be grateful if you wanted to support me by coming to my game. It's called Level Up Everything. I'll put the link to the Steam page down below. Work in progress. I'm planning on releasing it in March 2025. I'd be grateful if you followed and wish listed the game. And of course, I'd be happy for any feedback or comments you have. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and I hope you pick something up. Cheers.